Hello, comp lovers. This is Paul Kerwin, live streaming again. So I was thinking about green screen. So I'm starting to really try to pull some things out. I want to have some discussions about very industry specific stuff. Um, anyway, and so one of the things that I'm going to be talking about a lot is the approach of how to break things down, what it is that we're looking for, where are our problems going to be, where are our challenges, how do we approach something like this. Like, assuming that this is live streaming correctly, I've got a girl in a purple top dancing around in front of a green screen. It's fairly typical for a lot of the stuff that you'll find in stock footage libraries. So the first thing that I need to mention is that this is compressed. Okay, these are movie files. I probably should have brought that up in the one that I was talking about, the Mandalorian, which was last time. Especially when I started talking about, oh, there's no detail here in some of these areas of the screen, and that's an intentional thing that they're doing creatively. When you were looking at that, you obviously would have noticed as well that it was there literally was no detail, just in terms of a different way of describing detail, and it was because it was compressed. It's a rip of the Mandalorian, because I can't. I would have had to have captured my Disney stream in real time. Anyway, so there was a lack of detail there, but there would not have been a lack of detail in the original, right? At least the lack of detail is due to creative choices, as opposed to that there's no detail because it's a compressed, a series of images that have been compressed and then uncompressed into EXRs. Anyway, so from a technical point of view, I probably should have pointed that out. For the purposes of this, though, I don't know whether these images are going to have enough true deep colour information for me to really be able to get into the guts of how we key, or how to key, or how I key, I suppose. Um, but for discussion purposes, it's perfectly adequate. So we're going to start with this girl dancing around in purple. And just wanted to talk a little bit about what's the kind of things that we're looking for, where are my issues going to be, how do I go through the process in my head of getting a key like this to final. And the first thing that you want to be doing with a lot of comp tasks, and definitely with anything that's shot like this, is you're trying to find, for chroma key, it's things like hold, reflection, motion blur, right? The challenge for a lot of keying, whether it's blue or green, and a lot of the stuff you see nowadays is green, is true motion, really nice soft motion blur. So you're looking at these kinds of frames where you can see this girl's hand. We're looking to be able to pull this kind of detail, and to be able to do it so that we have a high level of veracity between what was actually shot and what it's going to look like in the final comp. That's very dependent on the background that goes in, but it's part of the art form, is to try to produce a result that's realistic as possible, like that's true to image as possible. The whole idea about using green screen is that I don't know what this girl's dancing in front of. She could be dancing in a diner, she could be dancing in front of like a giant alien robot, or it could be a set extension or anything like that. You're trying to make it look as if the green screen's not there, okay, or the blue screen's not there, okay. What would it look like if she was actually not dancing in front of a green screen, but she was dancing in front of the diner, or in front of the streetscape, or in front of the city, or in front of a daffodil field, whatever it is. So we're looking to break down, really look at the original pixels, and to see how we're going to composite this and bring this into the final. And so it's really about trying to make it as true as possible to the original plate. So the first thing you have to do is you just have to rip the plate apart. Right? You really have to have a very good look at it to try to be finding out where your challenges are going to be, what is it that you want the final to look like, and where are the technical aspects that are going to be a challenge. A lot of compositing is very creative, okay? You have a particular goal in mind, and there's a number of different ways you can get there. And then you also have the technical challenge, which is just to dealing with pixels and how cameras capture information, and how that differs from what our eyes see. And the technical process of something like a chroma key. Why is it shot the way that it's shot, and how do we produce a final image that is photorealistic, that looks real, but also is at a technical standard that's going to get the shot over the line, and what are the technical limitations. And so that has a lot to do with how computers store information, how our eyes perceive light, and all this really good stuff. It's all stuff that I find really interesting, and I love talking about it, so you'll probably hear a fair bit of that as we go. looking at this that I know a lot of my challenges are going to be keeping this really nice motion blur. Like you can kind of see here is an example where that's a single frame of her hand. And you can see that here, for example, if we're not careful how we key this particular portion, it'll feel really cut off. Right? We want to keep this series of the real softness of of her moving through frame. The shutter's open, so the shutter on the camera is open for a particular amount of time. During that time, she moves, and the movement of that light is captured by the camera, and we want that to be in the final as well. Okay. So you're looking at the trying to make the motion blur as true as possible. Partly that's to do with opacity, so the fact that her arm is not see-through. It looks see-through in some parts because of the movement, but we have opacity to deal with, which is your alpha channel, and we have color, which is going to be your RGB. Okay, so how transparent are these pixels, and what is their color, assuming there's no green screen there? This is very convenient in that she's dressed in a purple top. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. That will actually make our job easier in some ways, and it will make our job harder in other ways, because of the fact that she's diametrically opposed to green. Right, so it's like if you overspill correct something, you'll see magenta. If you see magenta in a lot of visual effects movies, whenever you see the colour magenta, it tends to mean that something has been overspill corrected. The spill correction on your key is not correct, right? Purple is not a colour we see in nature very often, whereas we see green in nature very often. So it can often be a red flag when you're keying something. If you see too much magenta, it means that technically speaking, on a technical level, your key's not up to scratch. Okay, but we'll talk about that in other ones. I won't get into it too much right now, but we will have some challenges in a key like this because there's a couple of other things. So a lot of it is our motion blur. We want to see these sorts of frames where you have a limb, her limb crossing her body, where you don't see a really solid key for the body and then a really ethereal for the limbs, right? In these sorts of areas where edges cross, all these non-linear shapes intersecting, that's when you can tell whether or not you have a key. There's a couple of other things. It's a good example of spill. So she's standing on a green screen floor as well. So when you look at these sorts of frames, you can actually see along the detail of her arm, the underside of her arm, this is green. Now the reason that's green is that in the shadows we perceive it more heavily, but that is the floor of the green screen that's facing up and providing light on the underside of her arm. So it's actually spill, right? Because of the fact that she's standing in front of the green screen, which is like just means it's just like this giant green spotlight that shines over everything. Okay, so even in areas that aren't quote unquote directly lit from the screen, you'll see bounce from other parts of the set. Okay, so that's a good example of a frame where there's some spill in here we're going to have to correct as well. Okay, and that will lead to an interesting discussion about the non-linear nature of light and why you'll read your spill more significantly in areas of shadow than you will in areas of bright light. So for example, you can even perceive just a little bit of spill in the folds of her shirt, right? Certainly on this underarm, this is very quite green. And the reason that this reads more than this, for example, is just because this is more shadowed. So the actual linear contribution of light from the bounce is the same in both areas, but you perceive it more in the shadows because of how our eyes work. So that's something that we'd have to be keeping in mind as well, something I'm looking at. So there's going to have to be a reasonable amount of spill correction here so that we can remove the bounce influence of that green in the shadow side of her, even under the chin, for example. So these pixels here, you can obviously see as soon as you start to look in, you start to see lots of lovely compression artifacts, which is why I don't know whether I'll necessarily proceed any further with this, but it's really good as a point of discussion for the kinds of things that we're looking at. What some of the challenges are going to be as we go to key this. Also, I think the closer you get to the bottom of the frame, you'll see more green influence as well in here on the bottom of her shirt. So this is a white shirt that she's got underneath a purple shirt. This is the shadow of this shirt on the white shirt, and in actual fact the contribution of the spill is going to be the same here, but you perceive it more readily because of the fact that this is shadowed. Anyway, so a couple of interesting things there. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I will have to have a closer look to see whether I think that there's actually enough colour information in this compression that means that this would be worthwhile. But it's really interesting to look at. There's so much stuff in here that we can talk about. Anyway, So I just wanted to have a very quick chat about that. First thing I'm going to do is really pull this apart. I'm going to have a look in some stock footage libraries to get some stuff that's uncompressed. I'm moving towards getting some. I want to do some classes where I start to go on about chroma key, because it's interesting. A few people have brought it up in some of the chats and some of the discussions within our compositing mastery group. And certainly I've been keying stuff for years and years and years and years, and it still takes time. It takes time to do it well. Depending on what sort of facility you're at, it will take a lot of time to bring it to a really high technical quality, and you spend a lot of your time chroma keying. There's less and less stuff being shot on real sets. A lot of stuff is being shot on virtual sets. A lot of it is being shot indoors, and more so. So you're seeing essentially less location stuff, and more green screens, more blue screens, depending on what facility. So I really want to start digging in and starting to talk about this. But I wanted to have just a quick chat about, just to point out some of the stuff that I'm looking for as we start to break keys down and say, okay, let's key this. Let's figure out how we're going to get it totally finalised. And so you're looking at hair detail, you're looking at motion blur, you're looking at transparent areas. There's no true semi-transparent areas. She's not wearing like a lace top or something like that. So it's really just about how are we going to key the hair, how are we going to get some really nice soft edges from this key. How can we get it over the final? And what is it we're looking for? How do we break this stuff down? After doing it for 20, 25 years, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I just do without thinking about. So I'm trying to go through the process of what is it we're really looking for, and how can we composite this stuff? How can we get a really beautiful quality result as if the green screen is not there? Okay, and there's a lot of time spent on this. If you're a compositor or you want to be a compositor, you're going to spend a lot of your time keying. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll probably try to post this on a couple of other boards. Please let me know in the group chat, or start a group chat, about what some of the challenges that you face when looking at chroma keys. What's the stuff that makes you really frustrated? What are some, are there any techniques you're using that you think are cool? How do you approach them? What tools do you use? That sort of thing. Anyway, so I'm Paul Curran. Thanks very much for listening. Bye.